The Forgotten Motel. In the late 1990s, a young couple, Daniel and Laura, decided to take a road trip to celebrate their engagement. They wanted to escape the chaos of the city and immerse themselves in the quiet solitude of the countryside. The journey was perfect until a sudden snowstorm hit, forcing them to take an unfamiliar route through the woods. After hours of driving in the blizzard, they stumbled upon an old weathered sign that read, "Ravenwood Motel, Vacancy." With no other option, they decided to stay for the night. The motel stood isolated, shrouded in mist and decay. The building looked like it hadn't been maintained in decades, with peeling paint and broken windows. Yet, a dim light flickered in the lobby, suggesting it was still operational. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew. A peculiar old man, the motel's owner, greeted them with a toothy grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed them the key to room 13, whispering, "Stay inside. No matter what you hear, don't open the door." Confused, but too tired to argue, they agreed. As the storm raged outside, strange things began happening. Faint whispers echoed through the walls, and the faint sound of footsteps paced outside their door. Laura swore she saw shadows moving under the crack of the door, but Daniel dismissed it as her imagination. At midnight, there was a knock. A soft, deliberate knock. "Who's there?" Daniel called out, but there was no response. The knocking persisted, growing louder and more frantic. Against the owner's warning, Daniel decided to look through the peephole. On the other side, he saw a woman in tattered clothes, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. She mouthed the words, "Help me." Laura begged him not to open the door, but Daniel couldn't ignore the woman's desperate plea. He unlocked the door and stepped outside. The hallway was empty. As soon as Daniel stepped back into the room, the atmosphere changed. The walls seemed to pulse, and the lights flickered violently. A low, guttural growl echoed through the motel. Laura screamed as a figure emerged from the shadows, a grotesque, misshapen entity with hollow eyes and claw-like hands. The creature lunged at Daniel, but he slammed the door shut just in time. Trapped inside the room, the couple tried to make sense of what was happening. Laura found an old journal hidden under the bed. It belonged to a previous guest and detailed similar encounters with the creature. The final entry read, "There's no escape. It won't let us leave." Desperate, Daniel and Laura decided to make a run for it. They gathered their belongings and braced themselves. The moment they stepped out of the room, the motel seemed alive, its walls closing in and its corridors stretching endlessly. They sprinted toward the exit, the creature chasing them with inhuman speed. Just as they reached the lobby, the old man appeared, blocking their path. "You were warned," he said, his voice distorted. "No one leaves Ravenwood." Summoning all their courage, they pushed past him and burst into the storm. As they reached their car and drove away, the motel vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but an empty clearing in the woods. Weeks later, Daniel and Laura tried to find information about Ravenwood Motel. To their horror, they discovered that the motel had burned down in the 1970s, killing everyone inside. But the most chilling part? The owner's face in the old newspaper article was identical to the man they had met that night. The haunting trail. After their escape from the Ravenwood Motel, Daniel and Laura struggled to return to normal life. The chilling experience had left them paranoid and sleepless. Every night, Laura woke up drenched in sweat, hearing faint whispers that reminded her of the motel. Daniel, on the other hand, began noticing strange occurrences around their home. Doors left ajar, cold drafts in warm rooms, and objects inexplicably moving. One evening, while researching more about the motel, Daniel found a peculiar forum thread titled "Survivors of Ravenwood." The thread was filled with cryptic messages from people who had encountered the motel and lived to tell the tale. The most common warning was, "It never truly lets you go." As the days passed, Daniel and Laura began noticing a symbol etched into their belongings, a crude drawing of a raven with hollow eyes. It appeared on their bedroom mirror, scratched into the wooden table, and even on Daniel's laptop screen. One night, Laura discovered the same symbol on her wrist, faint but burning as if branded. Panicked, she showed it to Daniel, who found a matching mark on his own arm. Desperate for answers, they reached out to one of the forum users who claimed to have survived. The user, known only as Nightshade, agreed to meet them at a diner on the outskirts of town. Nightshade was an older man with a haunted expression. He explained that Ravenwood wasn't just a haunted motel. It was a trap, a liminal space that preyed on lost souls. "Those who enter are marked," he said, rolling up his sleeve to reveal the same symbol on his arm. "It's a curse. You're bound to it now." Daniel asked if there was a way to break free. Nightshade hesitated before answering. "There's a ritual, but it's dangerous, and if you fail, the motel will take you back, permanently." He handed them an old weathered book, filled with arcane symbols and instructions for the ritual. The ritual involved returning to the site of the motel, summoning the entity, and severing their connection by burning the mark. Despite their fear, Daniel and Laura decided to go back. Armed with the book, they drove through the same snow-covered forest, retracing their steps. To their shock, the motel reappeared, looking as decrepit as ever. As they approached, the air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped unnaturally. They entered the lobby, where the old man stood waiting, his smile as sinister as before. "You came back," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Few ever do." Ignoring him, they rushed to room 13 to perform the ritual. Inside the room, they followed the book's instructions, drawing a protective circle and lighting black candles. Laura chanted the incantation, while Daniel burned a mixture of herbs. The walls of the room began to ripple, and the creature from before emerged, its hollow eyes fixated on them. It roared, but the circle kept it at bay. As the ritual reached its climax, Daniel and Laura pressed burning coals to their marks, screaming in pain as the symbol seared away. The creature let out a deafening shriek before dissolving into smoke. Freedom? Or so they thought. The motel began to collapse around them, its walls crumbling into ash. Daniel and Laura barely escaped, running into the forest as the structure disappeared behind them. They believed they were free, but as they reached their car, Laura froze. She pointed to the rearview mirror, where the faint outline of the raven symbol reappeared, glowing ominously. Daniel's blood ran cold as he heard a familiar voice whisper from the back seat, "You can never leave." The eternal curse. Daniel and Laura drove in silence, their breaths shallow, as the whispers in the back seat grew louder. The faint outline of the raven symbol on the rearview mirror pulsed, glowing brighter with each passing mile. "What do we do now?" Laura whispered, clutching Daniel's arm. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his voice trembling. "But we can't stop. We can't let it catch us." As the road stretched on endlessly, their surroundings began to distort. The forest seemed to twist and writhe, the trees leaning unnaturally toward the car. The road signs were unreadable, and the GPS spun wildly, unable to locate their position. They weren't just lost, they were being pulled back. Desperate for answers, Laura opened the weathered book Nightshade had given them. Flipping through its fragile pages, she found a section she had missed before. The binding ritual, To escape, one must offer a soul in exchange. Laura's hands shook as she read the passage aloud. An exchange? Daniel asked, glancing at her. The motel won't let us go unless it takes someone else, Laura explained, her voice breaking. We have to choose, or it will take both of us. As they argued over what to do, the car suddenly stalled. The headlights flickered, and the air grew icy. The entity materialized in front of the car, its hollow eyes glowing with malice. A voice echoed in their minds, guttural and cruel. Choose. Laura's heart pounded as she looked at Daniel. Tears streamed down her face as she realized what had to be done. I'm sorry, she whispered. Before Daniel could react, Laura shoved him out of the car and locked the doors. The entity lunged at him, dragging him into the darkness as his screams echoed through the forest. The car roared back to life, and Laura drove away, tears blurring her vision. Weeks passed, and Laura tried to move on. She moved to a new city, changed her name, and avoided any mention of Ravenwood. But the guilt consumed her. Every night, she heard Daniel's screams in her dreams, and every mirror she looked into showed the faint outline of the raven symbol on her forehead. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, the lights flickered, the air grew cold, and a familiar voice whispered behind her, "You can never leave." Laura turned, and there he was, Daniel, his eyes hollow, his face twisted in rage. "You promised we'd be together," he growled, stepping closer. Laura screamed, but there was nowhere to run. The last thing she saw was the raven symbol glowing brightly on Daniel's chest as he reached for her. Months later, a new couple driving through a snowstorm found themselves lost in the woods. They stumbled upon an old weathered sign that read, "Ravenwood Motel, vacancy." The cycle continued. The cycle, unbroken. Laura's scream echoed in her empty apartment. The next morning, her neighbors reported strange noises, but no one saw her leave. The police found no sign of Laura, just her belongings and a faint smell of burning wood in the air. Meanwhile, in a small town miles away, a man named Jacob was browsing an antique store. Among the clutter, he found a peculiar item, an old leather-bound book with strange symbols etched into its cover. Intrigued, he bought it, unaware of its connection to Ravenwood Motel. A familiar tale. Jacob was a journalist with a penchant for unsolved mysteries. He decided to investigate the book, piecing together its cryptic text and eerie illustrations. The more he read, the more obsessed he became. One night, while driving to interview a local historian, a sudden storm forced Jacob to take an unfamiliar road. Through the rain, he saw the faint glow of a sign, "Ravenwood Motel, vacancy." The new victim. Jacob checked in, greeted by the same old man with the unsettling grin. He was assigned room 13, the key feeling unusually cold in his hand. The man repeated the chilling warning, "Stay inside. No matter what you hear, don't open the door." Inside the room, Jacob found the book waiting for him on the bedside table. Confused and unnerved, he decided to document everything for his investigation. As the night wore on, the whispers began. This time, they were clearer, calling his name. The truth revealed. Determined to uncover the mystery, Jacob ignored the warnings and began exploring the motel. He discovered a hidden basement beneath the lobby, filled with relics from the past, photographs, journals, and personal belongings of previous guests. One journal belonged to Laura. Her entries detailed her escape, her betrayal of Daniel, and her haunting demise. The final entry read, "I thought I could break the curse, but the motel won't let me. I am part of it now." As Jacob read, the room grew colder, and a voice whispered in his ear, "Welcome back." The entity's origin. Deeper in the basement, Jacob found a shrine. At its center was a massive blackened raven statue, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. Surrounding it were symbols identical to those on the book, and the guest's marks. The old man appeared, his grin now a menacing sneer. "This place feeds on despair," he explained. "Every soul that enters becomes part of its tapestry. Some escape, but the mark binds them. They always return." Jacob realized the motel wasn't just cursed. It was alive, a sentient entity that thrived on fear and sacrifice, a desperate choice. The old man offered Jacob a choice. 1. Stay and serve the motel, becoming its new caretaker. 2. Escape, but carry the curse with him, spreading it to others. Jacob refused both options, vowing to destroy the motel. Using the book's instructions, he performed a ritual at the shrine, attempting to sever the motel's power. The walls shook, the lights flickered, and the entity screamed in rage. The raven statue cracked, and the motel began to collapse. The price of defiance. Jacob barely escaped as the motel crumbled into ash behind him. Exhausted and relieved, he believed he had ended the curse. But as he drove away, the book reappeared on the passenger seat, its pages opened to a new entry. The motel never dies, it only moves, and now, so do you. Jacob's reflection in the rearview mirror showed the raven symbol glowing on his forehead. A new beginning. In another town, a young woman driving through a storm saw a glowing sign in the distance. Ravenwood Motel, vacancy. The curse had found its next victim.